Today I'm jumping straight into how Wuthering Waves actually feels to play right now, after being away since early versions, and why the current state of the game is genuinely a strong entry point instead of just a catch-up phase. I'll focus on what changed in exploration, combat depth, character design, and story presentation, and what stood out the most during my return. Let's start with how different the game feels the moment you load in. I jumped back into Wuthering Waves almost 2 years after launch, and the gap between what the game was in 1.0 and what it is now is honestly huge. I remember running around farming monkey echoes on Geon and calling that endgame, and now I'm dropping into fights with full-on summonable space mechs deleting entire packs. The scale of how far the combat design and character kits have gone is immediately obvious the moment you load in. For anyone completely new, you play as the Rover, a legendary figure tied directly to the world's past and to most of the major story threads. The setting is Solaris 3, a post-Calamity world where a civilization barely survived, and the main narrative revolves around recovering your lost memories, reconnecting with former allies, and stopping a larger catastrophe that's still unfolding. You move between different regions, each with their own characters and story arcs, and while the opening chapters are fairly calm, the later developments push the stakes much harder than the early patches ever did. The first thing I ended up doing when I logged in was not even combat. I spent a solid half hour just moving around the map. Back in early versions, riding around as the Inferno Rider Echo already felt cool, but now the game straight up gives you a proper bike. You can boost, jump, chain grapples while driving, and even use it during story sequences. One standout moment had you freezing water mid-air and riding across temporary ice paths. It sounds simple on paper, but it completely changes how you move through certain areas, even if the turning radius still feels a little wider than I'd like. If you don't feel like sticking to roads at all, you can also just fly. Gliding down huge cliffs and cutting across valleys is easily one of the best ways to take in the environment, and I kept teleporting back to high points just to dive off again. The world itself supports that kind of movement really well. You've got the dense vertical architecture of Renacida, the frozen mountain ranges around Mount Jalar, and the high-rise modern atmosphere of Black Shore's metropolis. The regions are visually distinct enough that exploration never feels like the same map reskinned. Combat, though, is where the biggest change really shows. Wuthering Waves runs a 3-character team system, but the actual execution is far more demanding than most gacha combat setups. Enemy patterns now include longer attack chains and stricter timing windows, so dodging and parrying matter constantly, instead of being optional. You can swap characters freely, but each unit has intro and outro skills that are clearly designed to be chained in a specific order, which pushes you toward proper rotations if you want optimal damage and utility. On top of that, the Echo system still lets you summon or transform into monsters mid-combat, and there are now hundreds of different Echoes to build around. Every major patch adds new ones, which keeps expanding the number of viable setups instead of narrowing them. When you actually execute a full rotation cleanly, with swaps, parries, echo activations, and burst windows lining up, fights look closer to choreographed action scenes than typical mobile combat encounters. I'm still learning the systems properly, but the ceiling is clearly very high. What surprised me most is that you can enjoy the game in 2 completely different ways without it feeling awkward. On one hand, the kits are extremely deep, and the optimal rotations you see in guides are packed with small mechanical details. On the other hand, you can also just load in, press buttons, and still have a great time because the basic flow of the characters is so readable. I went in without caring about theory crafting and just focused on playing, and it felt refreshing not to chase perfect efficiency for once. Aemeath was easily one of the highlights for me. She swaps between 2 distinct forms, and both of them have their own movesets and utility, so you're effectively playing 2 playstyles inside one character. She also builds directly into aerial mobility, letting you stay airborne far longer than most characters, which ties nicely into the vertical level design. Lini, by contrast, is extremely fast and mobile, and while she actually provides team buffs, I mostly ended up using her as a high-speed skirmisher because her movement and attack flow make it very easy to stay aggressive. Some of the other kits I tried push the power fantasy even harder. You have characters that skate around while firing at enemies, others that phase between states or realities mid-combo, and some that literally drop massive celestial-scale attacks onto the field. The game clearly isn't trying to stay grounded with its ability design, and that decision shows in how distinct each character feels to play.
From a pure visual and thematic perspective, Morny and Augusta stood out the most to me. Morny's tech-heavy aesthetic, combined with her floating combat posture, visuals makes her gameplay instantly recognizable on screen. Augusta's kit goes in the opposite direction, time-stopping effects. Chiwan revolves around bouncing across bamboo structures, and even smaller touches like Brant pulling out an anchor as a weapon help keep the roster from blending together. Even at a very surface level, the animations, attack pacing, and movement styles across the cast are clearly built to avoid overlap. Every character communicates their role through how they move and how long their animations commit you to an action, which is something earlier versions struggled with. The third part that really stood out to me this time is the story presentation. I technically skipped most of the earlier chapters, so I'm not judging the full narrative arc here. I only played the opening portion of the 3.1 storyline, and I actually stopped early because I want to go back and experience the lead-up properly. Even so, the opening segment was noticeably stronger than what I remember from the early patches. Character animation, facial work, and voice direction are all much tighter, and the camera work does a better job of supporting conversations and emotional beats instead of feeling static. The overall direction in the 3.0 storyline feels more focused, and it made me curious to go back and play through the 2.x chapters as well. That said, it also highlights how much the game has evolved. The jump in quality between the 1.x content and the later regions is noticeable. You can skip parts of the early story now, and while there are still moments worth seeing, the opening hours are clearly slower and less polished compared to what comes later. If the start doesn't immediately hook you, it doesn't really represent the current state of the game. From a progression standpoint, this is also a very comfortable time to start. There's a large amount of available content right away, ongoing events that hand out a lot of resources, and enough banners and rewards to build a functional roster quickly. With the anniversary coming in the next couple of months, the onboarding period is likely to become even easier for new or returning players.